You're listening to the CDL Files, brought to you by Driver's Legal Plan. Our show is hosted by Marilyn Serber and Brad Klepper, and we're really glad you joined us. Come along for the ride as we delve into some interesting corners of the trucking world. Let's open the CDL Files.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the CDL Files. I am so excited today to be joined by some friends from the National Motor Freight Traffic Association, also known as NMFTA. We have Debbie Sparks, who's the executive director, and we have Ben Wilkins, who's lovingly known there as the cyber guy. And so we're going to dig into all things NMFTA and talk about what they're doing to protect carriers and owner operators out there. And so, Debbie, let's start with you. A lot of our viewers or listeners may not be familiar with NMFTA. And so, tell us, what is your association? Who do you serve? And what is your mission?
Absolutely. So we are an old association. We've been around since 1956. We're the standard setting organization, and our roots are in LTL. So where we originated back in 1956 was the commodity classifications, how we classify the goods that go in the trailer of the LTL vehicle. But over the years, we've evolved, and that's kind of where we're going today. So our roots are in standards. Probably about 10 to 12 years ago, we had a small group of staff that really started literally dabbling in cybersecurity, looking to the future and saying, what's going to be happening with technology, with our equipment. And it was really, we worked with a lot of universities. It was very insulated. We did it internally. About 4 years ago, the board of directors went out looking for their new executive director. Their executive director had retired, and they really wanted to do more with cybersecurity, but they themselves were trucking guys, they're LTL guys, and they're like not really sure what we were going to do with it. So they said, let's bring in an executive director and figure it out. And I was stumped. I was like, okay, so I come from the truckload background, ATA, TCA, and I was like, cybersecurity. And right around that time, we had a group of LTL carriers that came to us and said, we really feel it's time to digitize the industry. And when you're going to remove paper and you're going to go digital, the light bulb went off. And I said, okay, now it makes sense. If we digitize the industry, now we have to safeguard the data as it goes back and forth. So we really kind of knew what we were going to do in that very small space so we could set the standards for digitalization. And then we overlay it with cybersecurity. But then as we started bringing in our cyber experts and really uncovering the fraud that was happening, what's happening now, 10 years ago, we didn't even anticipate it, but not the way we're seeing it now. So still a standard setting organization, the roots in LTL commodity. Then we're now into the standard setting for digitalization. And then Ben and his team are really setting up the standards for both the vehicle, the office, everything and how it connects to keep us and our nation and our goods safe.
That's amazing. It's so relevant, right? And so timely. Kudos to your organization 12 years ago, right?
Yeah.
To be
Yeah.
forward looking and say, I mean, take away, even without the pandemic, right? It would still be so timely, but the timing, that all surged it forward, I'm sure, too. And so
Yes.
that's very fascinating. And you guys are really the only association doing this, right? For the whole industry.
I think I would say yes, in
Mhm.
setting standards, really understanding it. We're going to be doing certifications. There's a lot that we're going to be doing. I will say that we are seeing more and more associations putting it on their agendas. It is a very high topic. And we're happy to say that Ben and Artie and our team and Ann are being invited to be those speakers.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
as you know, the complexity of it that Ben and his team have to deal with is that the diversity of our industry. So we go from a small owner operator up to a Fortune 500, 100 company,
Mhm.
and their needs differ greatly.
Yes. Yep.
We have a
But they're just
small
as
and
important,
powerful
right?
team.
I mean, we
Yes.
need those owner operators just
Yes.
as much as we need those Fortune 100 trucking
Yeah.
fleets. So,
And
absolutely.
Ben can speak to it. It's really takes on a whole new meaning for supply chain. It's the chain of the data and the information, at any point where it breaks, we're all vulnerable. So it's really essential that everybody gets a seat at the table and can learn, and they're phenomenal teachers. And we got so lucky. I'm gonna maybe make you
Yeah.
blush a little,
I'm
Ben,
so
but
excited. But
Ben's
yeah, this is a
background,
fascinating topic. Yeah. Yeah.
Ben
Ben, and
comes from trucking. So
okay.
Ben knows it inside out. Like, we found when looking for the right folks to come in and help us, there's a lot of really great cyber folks.
Right.
Artie's one of them. He brings so much to the team. But then with Ben, we got somebody, he's been behind the wheel. He's got a CDL. He's
Amazing.
been out on the road. He's run a company. So he brings that side of the table too. So we really think we're well poised
No,
to
that's great.
protect the industry.
And that's I love that he has a trucking background because I do feel like that is built-in credibility with
Yeah.
truckers. When you have, especially if you have a CDL, but when you've spent some time at a trucking company, and you've done that, it's always, gives you kind of a leg up when you're dealing with other trucking people. So that's great. And so, Ben, what are you guys seeing? What kind of cyber attacks are targeting drivers right now? What does the market look like right now?
Well, it's a busy playing field right now.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that we see, though, is still hands down, it's social engineering, right? So the techniques that are being used are evolving. And it seems like every year some new tool comes out, or, with the explosion of large language models in the last couple of years, the phishing emails and the text messages and things have gotten a little harder to detect.
Right.
But social engineering is still the number one way that we see the compromise start. It's either someone gets talked into giving their credentials, clicking a link, downloading an attachment. In this industry, we see so many different methods of getting information from our trading partners. Some might send you a PDF, some might send you an email with a link, some might have you go to their online portal. And it's very easy to get complacent and get used to that kind of
Hmm.
interaction, even with a new and untrusted customer. So we see
Absolutely.
that being a pretty big threat still.
No, yeah, no, and that as we were discussing, we are an industry of small trucking companies and owner operators. And so what is makes those fleets and owner operators especially vulnerable to things like this?
So there's two things I think that really impact that. And number one is the misconception that if you're not a large company, you're not necessarily being
Yeah.
targeted. That's still a widespread misconception that we work hard to dispel. If you have any online surface at all, you're a target. Right. These are indiscriminate global targeting kind of situations. And the other really challenging point for a smaller operation, or especially a single owner operator, is a lack of resources, whether that's time or personnel or finances, and a lack of expertise, right? I don't think, I'm probably an exception in the trucking world, where I went into trucking and ended up in cyber.
Yeah.
Most people go into trucking because they want to be in trucking. And, so you don't want to take time off of the road, off of those back office tasks that keep your business running, and be thinking about cybersecurity. So that's a real challenge. The farther down in scale you go, the harder it comes to stay
Yeah.
up to date.
No, absolutely. Because there is a lot, for these owner operators and small fleets. From a regulatory perspective in our industry, there's a
Yeah.
lot coming at them all the time. And this is just as important to keep their business running, but they probably don't realize that, right? That this is just as important to keep their business running. And so, what is one thing that a driver could do today to improve their cybersecurity?
So I'm going to do a shameless self plug here. Number one, you should come and check out some of the resources we've put out for the driver specifically. We have a set of, we call them our core controls. So it's a very straightforward, easy to digest, a couple pages, just a checklist item of the very central defense tools and techniques that you can put in place. And these are things that aren't going to cost an arm and a leg. These are things that don't require a lot of technical expertise. They're things like choosing stronger passwords, putting multi-factor authentication on your accounts, things that are very accessible and have a high return. And they can very quickly go from low-hanging fruit to a little bit of a harder target. And that's often all it takes to get you out of the crosshairs for a lot of these cyber criminals.
Just get you out of the hot zone, right?
So Ben,
Absolutely.
I could give a perfect example. My poor son was devastated. His Roblox account got hacked, and the gentleman that hacked him actually said, You were so easy to hack. He said, first initial, last name, 54321 isn't a safe password. He actually told my son that his password stunk and stole all his gems. So he was
Yeah.
Wow.
devastated.
I mean,
Yeah.
not laughing. I know that's crushing, and it's whether it's gems on Roblox or the keys to the kingdom in your business,
Yeah.
the impacts scale quickly.
Yes.
But it's really those types of practices that we try to
Yes.
teach that are almost more often they're behavioral than anything. It's about awareness and behaviors at the starting level.
You're right. I mean, I think we all have all these passwords out there. You know that some that we don't even access very often, so you don't even remember what it is. And so just doing that is a small thing that anybody could do it, right? If you just said we're going to take account of all of our passwords and go in and make them just a little bit stronger, you're protecting yourself. I love that. That's it's great to hear. I think that you can do small things that like you said, it doesn't cost $1 million, right? That's what resources that we need. So how is NMFTA supporting carriers of all sizes, with these resources?
So the first thing that we did when I came on board, myself and our director Artie joined right around the same time, and we were tasked with kind of looking at the resources that were available in the industry and finding the gaps and saying, okay, how do we take what's available and how do we make it either more accessible or more relatable at the different scales in the industry? Because you can't give a 2-3 truck fleet the same resources that you're going to give a 5,000 truck fleet that has a dedicated security team. They're very different animals. And so we looked at the industry and we kind of broke it down into buckets of fleet size and complexity. And then we started with our core controls for the owner operators. And then we layered onto that a little bit more detail, a little bit more complexity for small fleets, small to mid-sized fleets. We're talking up to a couple hundred trucks. And then we layered even more controls and more detail on top of that for the expectation of more complex enterprise environments as you climb the size scale. And so we've put out these guidebooks that are unique to those different groups of carriers, different sizes of operations. And along with those, we've had some resources that kind of apply across the spectrum, like how to choose secure vendors and how to ask them the right questions as you're onboarding
Okay.
vendors. And thinking about how does cybersecurity relate to cargo crime? Because we see a lot about cargo crime in the news, and we're all very familiar in the industry that it's a massive problem. So a good example of the relationship between cybersecurity and cargo crime is if you think about the modern schemes that are being used by cargo thieves, often start with either identity theft or the redirection or spoofing of carrier documents, right? So bills of lading, shipping details, things like that. And so I've worked with a carrier recently who had a load that they took from a customer of theirs, and they were brokering it out to an external carrier. And this was a carrier that they had dealt with in the past. And so they treated them as a trusted carrier. It was a new email account that they dealt with from that carrier that replied to them, but it seemed legitimate. It was related to the same company. And so they transferred the load details. The truck came and picked it up. And as you probably know, since we're talking about cargo crime, the load never got to its destination. It completely disappeared. It was a load of food products, non-serialized, very easy to disappear back into the supply chain. But what had occurred is that the carrier that they normally worked with, their email account was compromised. And so the email traffic was being monitored. And when an attractive looking load was offered up, they got into the conversation, got the load details, and they sent one of their own trucks to pick up, masquerading as this carrier. And so weaknesses in cybersecurity don't just relate to malware or ransomware or things like that. They can have very direct implications in freight fraud and cargo crime. So as we raise the security level in the organization, we do two things. We lower our risk of cargo crime, and we lower our risk of malware, extortion, ransomware, those types of things.
No, that's a great example. And I think, certainly not something I had thought of, right? You think of a traditional cyber attack, but you don't necessarily think about this. How does cyber enabled cargo crime differ from freight fraud?
So and Debbie and I, we talked about this recently. There's a lot of different terms that are used somewhat interchangeably in the cargo crime conversation. We have freight fraud, we have cyber-enabled cargo crime, we have straight theft or strategic theft. These are all
Right.
things that we hear being used. Um, and I think the best way to think about it is freight fraud is really anything that's using either identity theft or someone that's masquerading as a carrier or a broker that they aren't really, right? So that's if you think about a fraudulent identity, double brokering schemes, things like that would be considered freight fraud. Cyber-enabled cargo crime is a variant of that. Is very closely related. It's kind of a form of what the industry has known as strategic theft, where it's often facilitated by organized crime. It could be from overseas, very sophisticated, coordinated. There's reconnaissance. They can do things like GPS spoofing and rerouting of shipments and all kinds of stuff like that. That would be your cyber-enabled strategic cargo theft. And then straight theft is, I cut the bolt on the back of cut the lock on the back of the trailer and take a few boxes off the back. We've seen that since people moved freight.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah. No, thank you for that clarification because you're right. We do hear a lot of those different terms flying around and there's nuanced differences. And so after each attack, if you have an attack, organizationally, people are going to debate, cybersecurity insurance. And so what should listeners consider? And, as you said, you have the resources to say what questions should you ask, but what should listeners consider when they're, talking about cybersecurity insurance?
We set you up, Ben, so you sound wishy-washy because you get to say, well, it depends.
This is the classic, right?
Yeah.
But I will say, don't have the conversation after an incident, number one.
Okay.
You want to have these conversations right now. It's like talking about fire insurance after your house burns down. You want to have this conversation in front. But beyond that, and I always joke because I say it depends. But what it depends on is specifically the needs of your organization, the resources that your organization has, your risk appetite or the amount of risk you're willing to tolerate, and the maturity of your security program. Because the simple fact is a cyber insurance policy is not going to get written on your organization if you don't have a certain level of baseline cyber hygiene already in place. So that's something to consider first. It's not a replacement of cybersecurity programs, supplement to, that allows you to kind of shift or transfer some of that risk out onto your insurance company. But it really depends on the organization's, their resources and their business philosophy.
And I love your point of let's have the conversation now, right? Cybersecurity is out there and it can impact you no matter what size you are. And have the conversation in advance, right? And it will help you. Sounds like if you haven't done anything, right, to just even get a cybersecurity policy insurance, you will in fact have to clean up your shop enough to be insured. So that is great. That's good.
And that actually can be a way that if you engage in a conversation with a cyber insurance provider, often they're going to give you a roadmap of, hey, where are you right now? Let's talk about what you have for controls in place. And then they're going to give you a list of things that you need to do in order to get an insurance policy. And whether or not you go with that insurance policy, that's a good list to work through and to implement in your organization.
This has been fascinating to me. And so how can I and our listeners access these resources you've been mentioning?
Well, we have a lot of them for free on our website, so nmfta.org/cybersecurity. All of our guidebooks, the frameworks, all of this content is free to anyone in the industry. We have a lot of webinar recordings and things like that on there as well.
Thank you, Ben. Where should people go if they want to just learn more, get more information about NMFTA?
The first part, nmfta.org. And I'll tell you a connection for the listeners. We're the organization that issues and monitors the SCAC. So when we think about cybersecurity, we think about SCAC, we think about cross-border. One more reason why what we do with cybersecurity is so important. That SCAC is becoming more and more of a compliance issue. We've got to protect it. So it's important for us too. Cybersecurity, we have to keep all of our customers safe as well. So nmfta.org.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you guys so much for all that you're doing for the industry and for thinking about this highly relevant topic. And thank you for coming and sharing with us and our listeners. And we will be checking out nmfta.org to learn more. And I would encourage everyone who's listening to do that as well. And thank you guys for joining us today. And We will see you next time on our next episode of the CDL Files.